just feel free to,
I'm
yeah,
glad we're recording.
yeah, okay, cool. So Chrysta, I'll leave yeah, leave the thing to, please let, take it away.
Thank you so much, Trent. And I'm really glad to be here this morning at BoulderNet presenting to you. And we have a pretty small group live here today, but we are recording this so that people can watch it later. And that's great because this topic is so relevant for so many of us. And as not just in a job search, but throughout our lives. But I'm going to dive into talking more about managing our mental health during our job search and even starting a new job. And this is just, like I said, so important for so many of us. And oftentimes I don't think there's enough conversation around this and how we might be impacted, because when we're not having conversations around it, it's harder to know what we can do to improve our situation, to improve our mental wellness, our mental resilience, and our mental health overall. And so I want to tell you just a little bit about me. So you know who I am. My name is Chrysta Bairre, and I'm a career coach, a speaker, and author of this book called Beautiful Badass: How to Believe in Yourself Against the Odds. And I am also the founder and CEO of She Goes High, which is an introvert-focused women's leadership community in Northern Colorado. And so mental health is really an important topic to me. I've been speaking on it for years. It's a big topic in my book that I talk quite a bit about. And it's been great because what I've noticed over the last several years is that I'm finding that people are more and more open to having this conversation in business settings. And I love this. This is so important for so many reasons, because we are whole individuals, whole humans. When we are at work, we are not just our skills and experience. We're human beings interacting with each other. And I find a lot of the challenges that we face at work and a lot of the things that we experience at work are so related to mental health, and even how effective we're able to be at work or in our job search, what that process looks like. It's so affected by our mental health, and being in a job search is a really vulnerable position for most of us. You know, sometimes we're leaving a toxic work environment, and if we're not addressing our mental health after we've left a toxic work environment, we're trying to find another one, you know, we may not be coming across in interviews as well. We may not be as well set up to start in a new job. Or if you've experienced a layoff, I mean, even if you know that your current unemployment, you know, was not your fault, right? Like, even if your entire department got laid off, it's still such a humbling experience. I mean, I've been there, and I don't actually think I know any adults who haven't experienced a layoff at some point in time, if not multiple ones. And so it's such a universal experience that so many of us have been through, if not, you know, all of us. And yet I know, even though I am aware, like, I didn't do anything to cause this. You know, for example, one of the times I experienced a layoff in my professional career, we were bought out by another company. I was in the accounting department, and all of the accounting department in Colorado was laid off, right? So it was literally had nothing to do with my value or my worth as a person, as a human being, or as an employee, or any of that. But there's still this kind of lingering, sometimes self-doubts can come into play, sometimes fears can come into play. And so it's such a vulnerable time to be in a job search, even though it can also be an exciting time sometimes as well. And it's important to talk about our mental health. And really, I believe it's important to really pay attention to our mental health anytime you're in any kind of transition, whether it's a work transition or a life transition. And so there's been a lot of studies and research that shows that you know, transitions are stressful. They create a lot of stress in our lives, even if they're positive transitions. So things like getting married, starting a new job, moving, those can be positive changes for many of us. And yet our stress levels will still be really increased as we go through those things. And so anytime we're in a transition, I think is a great time to really pay attention to, how is my mental health and my mental wellness right now? And what can I do to really boost that for myself and give a little extra care, give myself a little extra resourcing when I'm in those times, so that I'm able to handle the stresses and the challenges a little bit better. And particularly when you're in a job search, so that whatever job I'm going into, I'm really choosing a job and choosing the situation that is going to be a good fit for me and that's going to be aligned for me, instead of just accepting the first thing that comes along, which is sometimes what happens in a job search, because there's this fear of like, I just need to have a job, right? And so then there's an accepting maybe of a job that isn't quite the right fit. And when we can really pay attention to our mental health and mental wellness, I think it can help us be more resilient in that job search to really find that job that actually is going to be a good fit for us and is going to work out and not take our mental health down even more, right? Because when you're already in that situation, you get that job that isn't great. If it's toxic right from the start, then, that's not a good place to be in. And I hope that no one either live here today or watching this call later is in that position. So let's hope to avoid that. So I want to talk about some ways that we can improve our mental wellness as we're going through transitions and just in day to day. So I really break this down into two categories. And the first one is self-care, or I also like to think of it as self-resourcing. Like, what can I do to resource myself to have better mental wellness, better mental resilience? And so when we talk about self-care, a lot of the times what comes to mind is pampering, things like massages or bubble baths or things like that. And those activities absolutely can be part of how we resource ourselves, how we basically refill our cups. Like, that's another way to think about self-care, is like, what are you doing to refill your own cup? And so pampering and really relaxing and rejuvenating activities can absolutely be part of that, but it's so much bigger than that. And so when I talk about self-care and self-resourcing, I really like to talk about some examples of what that looks like for different people, so that we can all get ideas of, if I know that I'm going through a transition right now, such as a job search, I may need extra self-care. I may need to plan proactively for extra self-care, regardless of how I happen to be feeling any particular day, just knowing that I'm going to need more resourcing. And so what does that really look like in practice? So I personally have a lot of self-care routines that I do, and these are things that work for me. And I'm not suggesting that all of these things are going to work the same for you, because we're all individuals. And even things that work for me in certain situations, I've been through some transitions where I didn't need these same routines. I needed to tweak them. So just keep that in mind as we're having this conversation, that this is going to be really unique and personalized to you, and really unique and personalized in some cases to your current situation and what you may need more or less of. And so for me, some of what my self-care routine looks like, it includes things like doing a daily meditation. And I'm going to say about that, I'm going to stop there, because I feel like meditation is one of those things that we get told is great for us, but it's really difficult for some of us to access meditation. So if accessing meditation is difficult for you, zero shame here. This is like a shame-free zone. Zero shame. If it's hard for you, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with you. You're not doing it wrong. You're
Well,
not
that's why they
less
call it
than.
practice, right?
Right. Well, and there's different types of meditation, right?
Right.
So for me, I do a movement-based meditation that I teach. And this particular meditation that I like to do every day that I teach, it's movement-based. It also is done to music. And so I have tried in the past to do the kind of like just sit cross-legged and like clear your mind kind of a meditation. Well, listen, I'm the type of person, I'm in my head a lot. I'm a classic like overthinker, really logical, reasoning, rationing person. I'm in my head a lot. And so that whole kind of clear your mind, sit still thing, as far as meditation goes, I haven't actually found that to be very effective for me. Maybe if I practiced a lot, I would eventually get good at it. But when I was first introduced to this movement-based meditation that's done to music, that was so much easier for me to connect with. It helped me be more present in my body. It helped me be more present, not just in my head, but like my whole body. And the fact that it was done to music was like, oh, okay, it's this particular meditation is not about like clearing your mind or trying to focus on any particular thought. It's about being present in the body. So if one kind of meditation, if that's something you want to try, and you're not wrong if you don't want to try it, but if meditation is something that you want to try for self-care, try some different types. If that, maybe that sitting still mind blank isn't going to be the way for you. There's a lot of great meditation apps that have guided meditations you can try. There are such a thing as movement-based meditations, there's all kinds of things and ways that you can access that similar energy that don't have to be the sit still and clear your mind, that you can try if that's something you want to do. Anyone here have experience with a meditation that you've really liked or haven't liked?
At one point in my life, I was doing cancer therapy, and I found suddenly I was doing a lot of walking. And I think it was because it was quiet time. And I think like the bilateral movement, left, right, left, right, left, right. I mean, I'd literally like get up at 3 a.m. and go for a walk around the lake.
Yeah.
And I think it is a similar thing. It was quiet and, yeah. So it's kind of a moving meditation. I think maybe kind of like you're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
and
I was determined to get into meditation or drop it, one or the other. So I went to Shambhala has retreats, and there's one up in Red Feather that I went to 3 years ago now. And lo and behold, after a weekend of doing it, I can actually do the control your mind sort of stuff. And I've stayed in touch with the people, and I meet with them every other week. And it's really helpful, especially when you're freaking out the most, learning, like building the muscles to control your mind and know that you're able to control your mind and move it to where you want to move it. So when you're freaking out about a job interview, to be able to say, no, what I want to think about is this. And that's a skill that you have to build. And I think the mind control meditation it's muscle building is really what it amounts to.
Yeah.
and
So I suggest Shambhala, a retreat. Or they have weekly classes, and check out the website. They're very nice people.
that's a great idea. And I do one. It took me almost a month. I probably should have gone to Shambhala, which clear your mind. I set my timer on my cell phone for 7.5 minutes, and I just walk and I listen to nature. It's all about, I can't think, it's turning off the mind to thinking about anything else. And that was hard, but I just walk and take in nature and listen. I've got a storm runoff drain behind me. I often walk that creek, right? And there's a trail, and my head clears, and then the alarm goes off. I'm almost in a trance, and sometimes I walk a lot further. I wake up, and then I do the same thing going back to my house, and it really calms me.
Yeah.
The other thing I'm probably gonna have to drop off just real quick, I think everyone should do. I have a gratitude journal, and I didn't do it yesterday, but I have a bunch of them. I bought like 10 of these for $1, my little ideas. But yesterday I didn't finish my third, but I wrote down 3 things, and it can't be family, my immediate family, but 3 things that I'm grateful for. And yesterday a bumblebee landed on a plant. I newly planted flowers, and I got to watch it for like 5 minutes. The second one, my nephew just called out of the blue and just wanted to talk about family we haven't talked in a while. And that was really wonderful. I included that one because it was so unexpected. We talked for almost 45 minutes. They're thinking about having a 3rd child. It's my oldest nephew. And the third one was, I was grateful that I can actually walk, because I've been having knee problems. I got a cortisone shot, so I can actually walk without a brace right now. And my meniscus is not torn. It was misdiagnosed, but it was badly sprained. So I'm grateful I can actually walk with very little pain. But I do this every day, and I read it before I go to bed, and then I read it when I first get up in my morning ritual, and then I do some journaling. But the 3 gratitudes I learned from my mom, who had MS for 40 years, and I learned this, I stopped doing it, but it's really, really strong, because everything starts with being grateful.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that, Mark. I really appreciate it. And I love all the different ways that people have shared that they have experience with meditation, right? And that's exactly to my point, is that there's a lot of different ways that you can go about if meditation is something that you want to try and add to your self-care routine or add to the way that you resource yourself. You don't have to. You're not wrong if you decide to do other things, because there's so many things that we can do. But if you decide to do meditation, there's a lot of different ways that you can access that. And so, as you've heard here, and so I really invite you, if that's something you think you might be curious to try, is to look for that way that is really going to work for you. And if you decide, hey, meditation is not a place that I want to focus right now, I love Mark's suggestion of the gratitude journal. Absolutely. That's something I wrote about in my book, something that I have done personally. I've had a daily gratitude practice for, I don't even know how many years, maybe like 15 years. And there's a lot of actual science behind how a regular gratitude practice can really improve mood and just change our perspective for how we perceive situations. Some example that I wrote about in my book was this one day that I was driving to work. I was actually riding my scooter. And so I was scootering to work, and they were doing some road construction. And I had this moment, this thought, like in my head, all of a sudden, like, oh, what a hassle, this road construction, it's taken me out of my way. And it's really inconvenient. And then I paused once I noticed those thoughts in my mind. And I was like, well, but actually this could turn out to be a good thing. And it actually was, because at that time, I rode my scooter to work every day. And I had to go over these really uneven train tracks. And so when you're on two wheels, whether it's a scooter or bicycle or whatever it is, when you're on two wheels and you have to go over really uneven, train tracks, it's actually kind of scary and dangerous at times. And you can fall and wipe out pretty easily in that scenario. So that's actually what the road construction was. I didn't realize at the time, but they were actually fixing or redoing those train tracks. So now it was like this really smooth ride. And so this thing that in the moment felt like an inconvenience, a negative thing to have to reroute because of the road construction, turned out to be something that was actually positive. And that's one example of how a regular gratitude practice can kind of help us catch that sort of stinking thinking, as Mark said, the negative thoughts like earlier on in that process, and just help us have a better mood and a better perspective, or choose a better perspective about other things that might be going on. Does anyone else have a gratitude practice, and what has been your experience with that? Yeah, Hari, go ahead.
Yeah, I do. I actually made it a part of my journaling and as well, and it's really been very helpful. Honestly, it wasn't something that was a gradual process. It was something that it instantly felt like, I was just focusing on the right things, and it was reminding me of all the things that are beautiful and working in my life. And I haven't stopped ever since, and I hope to continue, because it really has been very helpful.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you for sharing. Anyone else have tried this, and how did it work for you?
I don't journal, but I do either work in my yard, which it is really good for me, because then I get the physical exercise, because I find sitting all this time is bad on my knees. But I have an exercise class as well, and for me that type of thing is better. Or I get up early and go walk the lake.
Yeah. Exercise is a great example, Carol. Thank you for sharing that. Of like, again, this is a way we can self-resource and not exercise, again, because this is a shame-free zone, not exercise from that shame place of like, I should exercise and I'm somehow not as good of a person in some way if I don't. Not that kind of energy, but that taking a walk around the lake. I mean, Trent, you mentioned that too, right? That experience of just moving our body and being engaged in our body. Taking daily walks is something that I have as part of my self-care routine, is that I take a daily walk, even if it's just really short, a short walk, because physical activity or movement, any kind of movement, even if it's just putting on a song and dancing to it, or maybe you enjoy yoga and you take a yoga class, maybe it's going for walks. It can be simple, it can be more complex, but moving our bodies, any kind of movement-based activity is a really, really a great way to practice self-care and self-resource, and get us more present in our body, help us feel better about what's going on. It moves energy, like negative energy. I don't know if any of you have had this experience, but I certainly have. It's like frustration, anger, grief, anxiety can get kind of trapped in the body. And just moving, any kind of movement, moving the body helps kind of move that energy. So it's not just getting stuck in some part of the body. Does anyone else experience that? Like, do you feel like negative emotions can sometimes get stuck in your body?
Yes, I definitely have. And I struggle with that a lot because for me, it's not something that I've been taught to go to, the physical things. So I still have to remind myself very consciously to move and to just, try something else other than even like the sitting meditations. I find that they really help me identify what's going on with me, maybe emotionally, and that's wonderful. Except that in order for me to really move through it, then the doing something with my body is super necessary and helpful. So yes, it's not easy for me, but I do see the benefit.
Yeah, Carol, did you have something to add?
No, I was just going to reiterate what everyone else said, that for me, the getting outside, and even if I go take a hike with someone, or it's just, the sitting here with all of this, and sometimes you get pulled into it, and then before you know it, you've been sitting at your desk all day. And I think that's the worst thing that, we can all do.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. So, moving our bodies, any kind of movement is so important and powerful. And it can be harder if you happen to have a health condition that makes it hard. Like Mark mentioned, he was having trouble with his knees or one knee, and that one of his gratitude things was that he could walk recently, was like, I can now walk. And so, again, this is a shame-free zone. So we're talking about how helpful it can be to have embodied movement. But if that's difficult for you because of a health condition or an illness that you're currently going through, please don't shame yourself for not being able to do it temporarily, or maybe look into finding a way that you can move your body that is comfortable and safe for you, as much as you can, right? And so, if knees are currently a problem, there might be other things that you can do, like even just shaking out, just shaking out the upper part of your body, right? Sometimes can be helpful. And that's something you can just do at your desk. I mean, if you're around other people, it might look a little weird, or maybe not, who knows? Even just like stretching or putting your arms out. Like, I find for me, opening the chest is a really, really powerful and simple exercise or activity that just decreases a lot of stress and tension. Because when I start to feel stressed, I unconsciously, without realizing it, my jaw tightens up a little and my shoulders roll forward a little bit, and I kind of close inward. And so that practice of just opening my chest up and putting my arms out is really, really helpful for me.
Yeah, and Chrysta, to that point, because I'm going through physical therapy, the therapist also said practice deep breathing, because we do shallow breathing. Take really deep breaths from your stomach and your diaphragm to really oxygenate. And like you said, shake out. And even at your desk, you'll move your heels back and forth in your legs and get up every hour and a half. Because if you're sitting, it's hard. But just that deep breathing, I've found, has made me a lot better when I'm doing 8 hours of calls a day. But because we all do shallow breathing, but that really oxygenates your blood and gets you really going.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's a lot of apps too that are around breathing, or sometimes even on smartwatches. They will have a little take a breathing break, and it will just guide you through doing some deep breathing. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of resources out there just to support that, or make it maybe a little bit easier to try to add some of those things in. So let's have a few more examples of what self-care looks like. What else do you do for self-care?
And everyone, I got to drop. My client finally got home after fixing his flat. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for being here, Mark. Great to see you.
Mark.
Yeah. Bye-bye. Thanks, everyone.
So what else do you do to resource yourself or for self-care? Yeah, Carol.
Carol, I think you're muted.
I know, my computer is torturing me.
Oh.
Microsoft
is torturing
you. I had a pop-up window, wouldn't go away. No, mine was going to be, again, I do like going out in the yard and getting something done, even sitting on my back deck, for 15, 20 minutes. I got a lot of flowers coming up, so that's pleasant. And, I'm trying to grow a few vegetables and pots and stuff. So, I take care of that. And there's always something to do outside if you own a home.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, absolutely. Exercise, like enjoying a hobby that you have and actively participating in that hobby is a great way to practice self-resourcing and self-care, as well as for many of us, caring for your home or your home environment is also a great way. Like that's not necessarily something like everyone would think of, but for me, organizing my space or tidying up is a way that I practice self-care, because my mind feels more clear, my heart feels more clear when my space is tidy. And this isn't going to work the same for everyone. This is what works for me. But what is it for you that just helps you keep your head clear, your heart clear, right? Your energy clear as possible. Any other examples of what you do for self-care?
A lot of what was already shared, I do. I really think going outside is super helpful. I think really the biggest thing that I do is recognize that I need it, and also is the hardest one, frankly. And it's hard for me to say no. It's time to stop and shift focus on something else. But yes, I would definitely say that spending time doing something that allows me to experience joy, so just be with loved ones, or be playful with my little niece, or something like that. That's just kind of just pure joy is something that I've learned that is important, and I'm starting to try to make it more of a priority.
I love that. Yes, thank you. Anything that you experience that brings you joy, absolutely, is just as important as all those other to-dos on the list, if not more so. And one thing that you made me think of, Hari, is like one time I was in a mastermind group. It was a 6-week mastermind group, and my goal in that group was to have some kind of play incorporated in my day every day for the 6 weeks. It was like, okay, this is my goal for this mastermind. And it was a professional mastermind, but I realized that like when I'm in a state of more playfulness, I have more creativity, more innovative ideas, more inspiration, more motivation. All of that for me comes from engaging with play. And so you talked about joy, and I'm like, right. And it could be play, it could be fun. Like, what else are you bringing into your life every day? And so for that 6 weeks, every day, like I'd made a list of things that are playful to me. And every day it was like, I'm going to do at least one thing on this list, or add to this list something that isn't already on here that feels playful and brings that playful energy in. I also want to mention some like advanced self-care that you can do, and self-resourcing, in my opinion, also includes things like setting boundaries. And that's such a huge one that I like to mention, because sometimes we think about, when we think about self-care and what we're doing for ourselves, we think about things that we enjoy. And those things are great self-care, but also like setting boundaries. Who enjoys setting boundaries? Is there anyone on here that's like, I love it. It feels so great. It brings me joy. Yeah. It doesn't. It feels scary and hard. But it is something that we do for ourselves, and I believe for each other. I don't think boundaries as something that's selfish. I think of boundaries as something that shows my respect for myself and other people. And so sometimes some self-care activities or self-resourcing activities can be things that might be challenging, especially if we don't have a lot of practice or experience with them. But they can also be really important things, or like making that dentist appointment that you've been putting off. That can also, like if going to the dentist to you, or if you've been putting it off because you don't like going to the dentist, many people have anxiety about that. That also can be a way that you're practicing self-care, and showing yourself, you're taking action, and you're saying to yourself and you're saying to the world, like, I value my body, I value my health, I value my mental and physical wellness. And even though sometimes some of these things that I might do are difficult, I'm doing them because I value myself. And it's really hard, I believe it's really hard for other people to value us if we don't value ourselves. So it has to start with us, that we value ourselves and that we take consistent action to show ourselves and show the world, like, I value myself and here's how I'm showing up in that space, is through these self-care activities. So the other thing I wanted to talk about, the other element I think that's really important about mental wellness, is what I call community care. So we've spent a bunch of time talking about self-care, and most of us understand the concept of what that is. So what is community care? Well, if self-care is self-resourcing, like showing that I value through how I take care of myself and the things that I do for myself, community care is community resourcing. It's allowing ourselves to, our cup to be filled up by others. You don't always have to fill up your own cup 100% of the time. You can also allow other people to come in and give you a little bit, to fill that up just a little bit. And so I think community care, community resourcing is really an overlooked aspect. And when it comes to mental wellness and mental resilience, because so many of us, I don't know if anyone on this call has ever experienced this, but sometimes there's this energy of, you know, I need to get myself right first, and then I can go out and interact with other people or receive help. You know, sometimes when we think about asking for help, we think about, there's two situations, like for me personally, there's two situations that I used to be comfortable asking for help or receiving help. And that was, number one, if I absolutely could not do something on my own. So like asking for help with moving. If I was moving and I needed, like, there's no way I could move a couch by myself, right? You have to have another person to lift the other end. And I would know that. And so I'd be like, well, I would justify to myself that it was okay to ask for help because I was literally incapable of doing it on my own. I can't.
This is impossible without it. Yeah, you
Yeah,
can't do
it's
your
impossible. So it's
you can't
okay.
do your own open heart surgery.
Right, exactly. So that's one situation that I used to feel comfortable asking for help with. I literally could not do it alone. And then the other situation was if I didn't really need the help. So I don't know if anyone can relate to this, but it was sort of like, I can probably do this on my own, but help would be nice. And so then sometimes in that case, I would feel a little bit more comfortable asking because it didn't matter. But there was this gap in the middle of like, having this help would make my life so much easier and it would be so much better. But I just didn't feel like that was okay, right? There was a self-valuing that would go on around asking for help or receiving help, where I felt like I had to have it together. And I only got to ask for help or receive help in these like really extreme kind of conditions or when I didn't really need it. But otherwise, I had to be super like hyper independent, do it myself, like get my own poop in a group, if you want to, call it that. And then I can ask for help. And I've really changed my attitude about that over the last like 6 to 7 years. It's something I've been very intentional about, being open to receiving a whole lot more help and support and care and concern from people around me, from my community, from whatever resources happen to be available to me. And so this is just such an important aspect, I think, to really having the best mental wellness or the best mental health. And one way that this came up a couple of years ago for me is I had a good friend who had open heart surgery. And so a bunch of us organized this meal train for her. And I thought, how amazing is this, that when someone has like a major surgery or they're going through chemotherapy or they've had a death in the family, we show up for them and we come around them and we support them. And we're like, we're here for you and we'll bring you meals. And what else can we do? We'll send you cards and all of that kind of stuff, right? But so much of the time when that kind of community support shows up, it doesn't show up until it's like a life-threatening situation, right? Life-threatening illness, life-threatening surgery, or there's actually been a loss, a death in the family. And so I thought to myself, how cool would it be if I could be open to receiving help and show up to help other people before it gets to that point, before it's a crisis? Like, what would it look like for me personally to be open to receiving help when I'm kind of doing okay, kind of like I'm sort of barely holding it together, maybe going through some kind of major life transition, maybe in, recent job loss, or currently in a toxic work environment or something like that. Like, why do I think it's only up to me to resource and care for myself, and that, it's not okay to receive any kind of help? And so that moment really started to shift the way I thought about how I was asking for help and how I was receiving help. Because here's the thing, I have discovered since I've been on this journey around exploring community care and allowing myself to be resourced from the outside, is that help and support is showing up for me a lot. And I used to just turn it down most of the time without even truly acknowledging the support was there. So here's an example of what that might have sounded like. Somebody sees me, packing up after an event, and I'm carrying some heavy boxes, and they say, "Would you like some help with that?" And in the past, it was really common for me to be like, "No, I've got it." And here's the thing, maybe I did have it. Maybe I was perfectly capable of carrying that heavy box or multiple boxes out to my car, packing up at the end of an event. I'm capable of doing it myself, but that doesn't mean I have to do it myself, because there is an energy expenditure that happens from carrying all those heavy boxes on my own. I mean, I'm capable, I can handle it, but it takes.
There's also an opportunity loss.
Yes.
Right, because people like to give, right? They give you the gift of helping you, right?
Absolutely. And allowing someone to help builds relationship.
That's what I mean.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And so I used to just turn down help all the time without even thinking of it. So there's a level of community care that's like, how do I ask for help? But most of the time, honestly, I don't even have to ask. If I'm open to receiving that support, it's showing up for me all the time. I just didn't notice it was showing up for me all the time, because without even thinking, I was like, no, I've got it. No, I'm okay. How many times do you find yourself saying, no, I've got it. No, I'm okay. And that may even be true. You might have it. You might be okay. But what could it look like for you just to receive the help anyway, even if you have it? So I'd like to pause and check in. Yeah, Trent, tell me what you're thinking.
I take your point, because I've lived my life very much like you, and yeah, I'm good. I'm this very I've lived my life as this very self-contained, self-sufficient person, and I'm the helper person. I help anyone, right? But I need no help, right?
Yeah.
I'm a rock. I'm an island. That'll Simon and Garfunkel song guy, right? But in retrospect, I kind of think that therefore I suspect I kind of come off as a somewhat cold person, because I accept no help, right? Yeah. And so people don't, at some point people stop asking, do you need help, right?
Absolutely.
So I'm sort of in a shell, right? I'm kind of that hermit crab person, I'm guessing, right? Because people try to connect, but I reject, right?
Yes.
And to some extent, right? I mean, this networking group, right? How many people are here, right? And Kirk, welcome. You kind of, I know, popped in, and I see you popped in, and please join the conversation. But I mean, like, I know when I first got laid off, I was very slow to join into this kind of networking activity, because it just wasn't my thing to reach out to this kind of networking, mutual aid society, crowdsourcing of resources and aid, which is exactly the kind of thing that that you're speaking about, right?
Right. And yet at the same time, you mentioned in the beginning that you're a person who often shows up to help and support others.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
So
Right.
yeah, so I want to give, but I don't want to get.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
But
what do you get out of giving? What
oh,
do you personally, how are you personally served by giving to others?
um, it's pleasing to me.
Yeah.
Like you were talking, like in the first part, you were talking about self-care, and so like I get pleasure from giving. That's just kind of my thing, right? Like again, Mark was talking about gratitude journal, right? So like I say thank you to the microwave, which obviously does nothing for the microwave. I say, thank you to wait staff, right? Because that whole gratitude thing, right? And clearly that hopefully is good for wait staff, but it's also, you give, the giving is a pleasant thing, right? And so by not allowing people to help you carry stuff to your car, right? Obviously, if you're right, it helps you by not having to carry stuff to your car, but you deprive people the gift of them helping you, right? It's kind of like we have presentations on the informational meeting and / informational interview, right? And I think people are very reluctant to do that. I know I have been in the past because I don't want to bother people, right? But the interviewee oftentimes really enjoys that because they get the opportunity to help someone that needs help, right? So it's
Absolutely.
altruism, right, is a thing, right? It's
And
people do
here's,
pull over and help someone change their tire, right? People do, yeah.
and what I love about, you brought up the informational interviews, and I think that's a great example. I want to dive into that just a little bit too, because here's the other thing that happens in an informational interview. Not only does the person who's being interviewed get to help someone and have that pleasure from knowing they helped someone, but it also allows them to showcase their expertise.
Right.
And that
And to
builds
feel it.
confidence. Yeah. Like,
Not only showcase it for the other person, but they also, I think, get to feel it for themselves. It's like, wow, I really know my stuff.
exactly. So it even
Yeah.
has more benefits, like the informational interview, beyond just like, I get to help that person. That's one great aspect of it. But it's also, there's like, oh my gosh, this person thinks that what I have to share with them is valuable. They value my time. You get to showcase your skills and expertise and experience. There are so many benefits to both sides of the informational interview. And I really appreciate, Trent, that you said the thought in your mind was like, well, I don't want to bother them. I don't want to bother them. So when we talked about self-care and taking care of ourselves, and I described it, one of the ways I described it as is like valuing ourselves. But community care, allowing other people to help support us, is also a form of valuing ourselves. Because if the thought in your mind is, I don't want to bother them, I don't want to put anyone out, I don't want to, be disruptive, those are all ways that we minimize our own value. And every day, I hope that everyone that is watching this shows up in your value every day, but especially during a job search, because it's really hard to show up owning your value in a job interview if your practice and your habit daily is to minimize your own value through all these other interactions. So if you have a regular habit, maybe you don't even realize you have this habit of minimizing your own value or undervaluing yourself, it's extra hard to walk into an interview and be like, I'm going to value myself in this one situation, when my daily habit in many other situations is to undervalue or devalue myself. So again, I think that's one of the reasons that this whole community care, this being resourced from the outside, in addition to resourcing ourselves, is such an important conversation to mental wellness, mental resilience, as well as to our job search, because it's like, how are you showing up in your value every day, and how are you valuing yourself? And when we are valuing ourselves through self-care, as well as valuing ourselves through allowing other people to support us, then we are building mental wellness. We're building mental resilience. We're helping support ourselves through those difficult times of transition, through the stressful transitions, even if they're joyful, such as being in a job search or even starting a new job. Many of us were so excited when we start our job, and that's great. And like the tradition, I don't know if it is at BoulderNet, but I assume it is like when we're meeting in person, right? Is like the person, when you get a job, brings donuts to the meeting.
Right. Yeah.
As a way of thank you and giving back and everything like that. And then sometimes people stop attending, BoulderNet, NoCoNet, whatever that thing is, because now they have a job, and that's fine. That makes sense to a point. But I hope that everyone who watches this, whether you're live here right now or whether you're watching this replay later, I really hope that you think about, once you get a job, please don't stop accepting help and support, because you're in this new job, and that's still a stress. That's still a life transition and a stressor that you may need a little bit of extra support to get through. And you may be able to get by okay without that extra support. But what if it didn't have to be hard? What if you didn't have to get by? What if you could actually thrive? What would that look like? Any
Yeah,
other?
I mean, one of
Yeah.
the things I mentioned earlier, I kind of had this, cancer period in my life. And one of the things I kind of, that took some work. But one of the things that I kind of learned through that process was that, everything, kind of the, Carl Jung, right? Kind of the whole, light side, shadow side, right? And that, everything in life sort of has kind of light side and shadow side, right? So, right, cancer, a lot of shadow, right? But it also had some positive stuff, right? So there was this period in my life where I, on one side, I quote unquote, had to have chemotherapy, right? But another way of looking at that was I got to have chemotherapy, right? Because if I didn't, if there was no chemotherapy, that would have been really bad, right? So it wasn't that I had to have chemotherapy, it was that I got to have chemotherapy, right? And so, so there's kind of the glass half empty, half full, right? So, so, some years ago, I got laid off, and that was bad because suddenly I didn't have a job and I didn't have an income and blah, 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 blah. But I also no longer had a long commute. And there were certainly aspects of that job that I didn't like. And so I didn't have those things, right? So, there's always that, there's that, every cloud has a silver lining trope or whatever, right? And it's about, what do you want to focus on, right?
Yeah.
So that's that, so for me, that's that lesson learned from that whole cancer phase of life was, what are you going to focus on, right? Are you going to salt your wounds with the, I have to have chemo part, or are you going to not, right? And I get to have, cancer therapy and, just do it, right? And
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. And that's such powerful, because our perspective that we approach these situations can make such a difference. Absolutely. And even our perspective about how open we are to truly receiving help and what that can look like for us. So another realization that I had in 2020, when we were all in lockdown, my mental health, I was not doing well in that situation. Even though I am an introvert, and so I do love my downtime and my alone time, on the same hand, the complete isolation, because I lived by myself, the complete isolation and the uncertainty and the not ever being able to be around, anyone because I lived alone was really hard for my mental health during the pandemic. And, one thing that I noticed during that time is, like, in a period of depression, if anyone here, whether you're here live or you're watching the replay, if you've ever experienced depression, you may have experienced that sometimes, like, so oftentimes when you are feeling depressed and you're in a mental health crisis of some kind, people will say, I'm here if you need to talk, which is great. But sometimes when I'm in that situation, what is actually hardest for me, I mean, sometimes the emotional support, the talking is helpful. But other times, sometimes just those daily tasks can feel insurmountable. Just something as simple as like doing the laundry can feel like, I don't even know that I have energy for that today. And so I was really feeling some aspects of that during the pandemic when we were all in isolation. And a friend of mine reached out to me, and she actually phrased it this way. She called and she said, Chrysta, I have an opportunity for you. And this may be difficult for you to receive, but I hope that you will be open to receiving it. And so my curiosity was piqued at what she was going to say next. So I was like, okay, yeah, I'd like to hear about this opportunity. And she said, I know that you've been struggling, and I would like to set up a meal train for you. And I know that you're capable of making your own meals and doing all of these things. I know that you're capable of doing that. And I know that having help with some of those things would just make things easier for you right now. So would you be open to receiving this help? And she was right. It was very, very hard for me to say yes to, because there was so much like in my mind that wanted to be like, that's ridiculous. I'm perfectly healthy from a physical perspective, but I was like, no, I'm going to be open to this. And so I allowed her to set that up. And so the things that we had on this particular meal train is we had some meals that people dropped off to me, as well as, because I was feeling so isolated, we had things on there like to either mail me a card or like just a small little surprise package, or to drop it off at my doorstep. And so that physical, tangible connection to other humans through those cards or through those meals that got dropped off for me, it really did improve my mental health in such a significant way. And I was so grateful, first of all, that my friend even thought to offer this, and that I was also grateful that I was open to receiving it, because, that exhaustion, because it was the pandemic, I couldn't have someone come in and help with laundry or dishes or whatever, but I could have someone help with the meal, because they could just drop it off on my doorstep and I could take it. And I felt the connection to those people, but it was also one less thing I had to have on my plate that day. And sometimes just having like one small thing taken off your plate is just a huge, we all have this mental load that we deal with every day. And so just having one thing off the mental load, I don't have to go through all of the decision making that goes into what am I going to make, actually doing the work of making it, cleaning up all of the dishes. There's some dishes when someone drops a meal off to you, but oftentimes it's less than if you cooked the meal yourself. And to most of my friends that offered to drop off a meal, they didn't even really put in that much effort. They made whatever meal for themselves, and then they just packaged up a small amount and dropped it off to me. And so I really like to share this story, because I really want to open up people's minds to receiving help and support from other people, and that it can look like a lot of different things. And that particularly if you are going through a major life transition, if you are going through a mental health crisis, I really, really hope that you will be open to not just self-care and increasing your self-care, but also be open to receiving support and help from your community, and increasing, most of the time you're not even having to ask for it. It will show up for you if you notice it. You just have to say yes. You just have to say yes when it shows up. And sometimes it might look like asking for help from people. But my experience, it suggests that a lot of the time, it's way more often about just receiving it and saying yes when it shows up. So I want to wrap us up, so we have a few minutes at the end. And I just want to remind you that your mental wellness is important. Your mental health is important. And that during times of transition, such as a job search or starting a new job, or just having been laid off from a job, you may need additional support. You may need additional self-care and self-resourcing, and you may need additional community care and community resourcing during those big life transitions, just to help you see it through. It doesn't have to be hard, or it doesn't have to be harder, right? We might not be able to change the fact that certain life transitions are very difficult, but it doesn't have to be harder. And paying attention to our mental health and our mental wellness, being more resourced are all ways that we can help make that easier for ourselves. So I'm going to wrap up there, and I don't know if there's questions or other items on the agenda to cover.
Well, yeah, does anyone have questions? Well, and I definitely wanted to invite Kirk to introduce himself. Kirk, I saw that you had joined us since we finished the first round of intros. Is Kirk still with us? Kirk, do you want to introduce yourself? And
Brent, do you want us to stop recording?
um,
Probably a good time to do that.
sure.
I don't think Kirk's been with us